Thanks, Byron, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's always quite humbling, and particularly when I'm amongst people like these guys I was just talking out the back, and Glenn and Tim, who have been doing this for so much longer than me, and have all been strong role models and mentors to me in my short dash. We're just, by way of introduction to Wilmot Cattle Company, I'm just going to play this little video. Some of you may have seen it before. It goes for about 6 minutes, but it's a bit of an intro to the business. So enjoy. I'm just going to put this by the...
I think to succeed in agriculture, you need to be driven by ambition. The vision of Wilmot Cattle Company is to restore the ecological function of our landscape in a profitable way. We know that a grass-fed beef product is the healthiest beef that you can eat, but we also know that diversity in our whole ecosystem is critical. There is a symbiotic relationship between soil, plants and animals, and our role is to enable that such that the biology in our soil is active and functioning and healthy. Pastures are very diverse and that we maintain as much diversity across our landscape as we can, because animals need that diversity in their diet. The psychology of our animals is paramount to their performance, and for them to perform the role that we ask them to undertake, they have to be in a healthy frame of mind. We then know that the product that we're putting on the table in front of a consumer is the healthiest product that they can eat. Wilmot Cattle Company is comprised of 3 properties. Wilmot outside Ebor, where we are today, our breeding operation at Woodburn between Uralla and Walker, and a 3rd property that we recently acquired called Morocco down at Canada. Really what we do here is reverting back to how Mother Nature managed this landscape. Animals roamed in large mobs to protect themselves from predators, and they moved across the landscape grazing for very short periods of time, and then they would naturally come back to where the feed was the freshest. And that's all we're trying to mimic.
We like to run the cattle at a high density rate, let the grass come back. We usually give about 60 days rest before we come back to that paddock again.
We're managing grass. That's what I like the most about it, and then we're using cattle to utilise the grass. It's not just looking after cattle, but it's looking after the environment, being aware of our kind of footprint on everything.
So within the tree lane here is a functioning ecosystem. We've got a mix of plants, there's great species diversity, there's really good ground cover. And if I take and stick a soil probe in the ground here, I can basically push it all the way in. If I step over the fence on the same farm, onto some of this country that's been farmed for a long time now, I can't even get that in the ground here. And this is the story of Australian soils. This is what we've done in agriculture in Australia, chasing higher production and higher profits. The exciting thing is that we can undo this. The major first step is ground cover. Right through the drought, our focus was all on looking after our country. Our cattle could be sold, they could go on a truck, we could get rid of them, as long as we looked after our country, and this is the result. I mean, there's so much ground cover here now, and so much species diversity, there's nowhere you could look here and see any bare ground. There's some paspalum, there's phalaris, there's cocksfoot, that's a brome grass, prairie grass. We don't sit down at night and just have a big chunk of steak on the plate. You know, as nice as that would be, we know we need meat and potatoes and carrots and broccoli, and animals need the same thing. They need diversity, and that's what they get from all these little forbs like that, and the plantains and the chicories and that little crow's foot. The last thing we want to do with the monoculture, the biggest thing we want is diversity. So what we want to see here in this soil is a good soft soil, good aggregation, plenty of air amongst the soil, plenty of worms, plenty of fungi, and all the signs that suggest that our biology is working within the soil. And you can smell it. Healthy soil smells good, and it's air in our soil that helps us build carbon in our soil. You know, we get so much infiltration of rainfall here because there's so much air through there. Early in 2020, we cleaned a few dams out. We were at the lowest rolling rainfall we'd ever been at. It started raining in late January, and it took 16 inches of rain before those dams started to fill. When you get that sort of rainfall and it's all going in, it's very encouraging, and it suggests that what we're doing is certainly working. When we've got abundance, there's opportunity. If we don't have a healthy functioning soil, we don't have grass, we don't have cattle, we don't make any money. We're seeing some extraordinary gains in our soil organic carbon here at Wilmot. That soil organic carbon will stay in our soil for eternity. At a very macro level, this is our contribution to climate change. This is our contribution to taking carbon out of the atmosphere, reducing emissions and putting it in our soil for perpetuity. The thing I really am the most proud of is the people within our business. They understand the fundamentals of our business, they understand what drives profitability, they understand what improves ecological health, and they're just as passionate about it as me.
There's definitely hard times, but the culture that's been created here, it's a safe environment. You can say what you think, and it's going to be respected, and I like that.
Everything's open, it's on the table. If you're willing to learn, they're willing to help you.
We don't ever profess to have all the answers or to know everything. This is a constant learning journey. But what we do know we want to share with others for their betterment and also for the betterment of our industry and fundamentally for the betterment of our world. We know that if more of our industry can uptake regenerative agriculture principles, we'll put more carbon in our soils across Australia and across the world, and we will contribute to reversing climate change. One of the things that I find extremely rewarding is when Trish and Harry and Poppy and I go out in the paddock and Harry starts picking all the different species of grass that he can find. If I can maintain the harmony within this business that I've seen in so many other businesses managed in this fashion, the greatest reward will be for Harry to want to be a part of the business. For us to be holistic and for us to really regenerate the landscape on a broader scale, we've got to empower others, not just ourselves.
So that's a bit of an intro. Is that working? All good. That's a bit of an intro to the business. Like any good blockbuster, there's always a sequel, right? So the bit that's not missing, or that is missing on there now, is the acquisition of Paradise Creek, another farm, a fourth farm that we bought earlier this year. It's southeast of Inverell, about 6,000 acres. It's about 12 kilometres south of Danthonia, for those of you who know where Danthonia is. It's a beautiful part of the world. It's a confluence of three watercourses, the McIntyre River, the Back Creek and the Paradise Creek. And it's just a beautiful farm that's been, it was in the same family for 120 years before we bought it. And it's beautiful soil, there's beautiful sort of natural capital there, I suppose. But it had been somewhat unloved for a very long time. So our goal there is to, as I say, restore the ecological function of that landscape. So stay tuned for Wilmot Cattle Company 2, I suppose it would call it, 2.0. Before I start, is there any questions that anyone has that they would like me to address today? Byron's asked me to talk about value adding and carbon and the role of carbon in our business. Is there anything else that anyone wanted me specifically to cover? That's good, that'll be easy. And like any good young person these days, I was just thinking about this before, right? I reckon for agriculture to advance technologically, we've actually got to get rid of the notebooks. So all due respect to the LLS, but if we didn't give everyone notebooks, they'd have to do stuff on their phone, right? So, and I've been home for 2 days in October so far. So this is my presentation on my phone. So if you see me look at my phone, I'm not checking my messages. So our vision at Wilmot Cattle Company is to restore the ecological function of the landscapes that we manage in a profitable way. So as Glenn just described, I really like that definition there by Charles Massey, and ours is quite similar. That really that's what we do. We're a beef production business first and foremost. That is our goal. That's what our guys get out of bed every day to do. Is think about how they can grow more grass, produce more kilos of beef, and run a profitable beef production business. But fundamentally, what we're doing in doing that is restoring the ecological function of the landscapes we manage. But we've got to be profitable, as Glenn described, in those concentric circles. It's interesting, the word regenerative, and talking to these guys earlier who were talking about doing GFP and with Stan Parsons, and back in the early 90s, the word regenerative probably wasn't even in the dictionary at that stage. I first heard this word about 6 or 7 years ago, as I started to get involved at Wilmot. And Gabe Brown talked about it, who wrote a really good book called Dirt to Soil. Highly recommend anyone who hasn't read it to read it or download it and listen to it. And Gabe talks about we have to actually take some accountability and accept that we have degraded some landscapes that we manage in this country and around the world, right? Through the farming practices that we've implemented over the last 70 years probably. It's had a detrimental impact on our ecology and our environment. And we've been talking about sustainable agriculture, and he said, why would I want to sustain something that is effectively degraded? We actually need to restore it, we need to regenerate it, we need to rebuild it back to something better than what it is now. So when I think about the word regenerative, I don't think of it in a divisive manner, I suppose. I don't think that if you're not regenerative, you must be degenerative. I just feel it's a word that describes what we do in a really positive way, I suppose, and an ambitious way. So that's my take on that word. In our business, our biggest asset is absolutely our people. We have only a small team. Each farm is managed by a manager and typically a station hand, or in some cases just a casual station hand. So it's a pretty lean labour force. But those people are certainly our biggest asset, and we invest a lot of money in their professional development. So they've all done grazing for profit, they've all done a Low-Stress stock handling school, they've all done a KLR marketing school. We equip them with as much knowledge as we can such that they can manage their operations as efficiently and as effectively as they can, so that they achieve those outcomes we're looking for in terms of restoring ecological function and also running a profitable business. The enterprise mix across the 4 farms is quite diverse, I suppose. We are all cattle. We dabbled in a few sheep a couple of years ago, which was quite funny. I rang Brent and said, what about some lambs down there? Why don't we get some sheep, you know? And he said, oh, yeah, that might be right. And that was like my little ticket. Right, let's go and buy some lambs. So we bought some lambs, and then for the next 6 months, Brent didn't stop working trying to keep these lambs where they're supposed to be and building sheep yards and getting them shorn on the neighbours and all sorts of other things. And it was a great idea for me. It was a hell of a lot of work for him. But anyway, we're basically a cattle business, but across each farm there's a mix, an enterprise mix there that allows for change in stocking rate as we need it. So we've always got trade cattle on hand that are somewhat divestable whenever we need to. As our grass availability reduces, then we could, they're the first things that go. All our farms have also got some portion of a breeding herd there as well, and the role of those cows is to landscape country. When grass gets away from us, it goes a bit rank. It's into a low nutritious state that is not conducive to trade cattle putting on weight or trying to grass finish cattle. So that's when we'll park a mob of cows in there and ask them to landscape that paddock, and they turn that grass into kilos of beef through their calf. So they have a role to play. So there's across the business now, across the 4 farms, there's about 2,000 cows spread across the 4 farms. Woodburn is primarily a breeding operation, as is Paradise Creek, and then Wilmot and Morocco have smaller breeding herds. Wilmot is starting to breed a few bulls for the rest of the business. Our main enterprise is our trading enterprise, so we turn over about 4,000 or 5,000 trade cattle through the business each year, most of them being steers and heifers. Some of them we're taking through to Woolies kill at the moment. Most of them end up at the feedlot. But we're buying and selling a lot of cattle, and that gives us flexibility through the year in terms of our stocking rate. And then the other part of the business that's always been there is a grass finishing enterprise. We've had a few cracks at our own brand. Over the last couple of years, we've just started to get good at killing cattle again, getting them finished, getting them hitting grid specs, and we've been just selling them into any of the main grids around the country. But that is a pretty core part of our vision, and we're on the cusp of developing our own brand again fairly shortly. But we'll only be killing the cattle that we breed, so there'll be somewhat of a limited supply, but hopefully a pretty high quality product that we can manage or control the genetics that are going into that product. And really for us, that's what we're aiming for in terms of being able to sell our story in a box of meat to a consumer. We don't ever see that being the entirety of our business, in that there are some limitations around that. When we need to unload cattle and they're only 450 kilos and we need them to be 550 kilos, those cattle have got to go somewhere, and they can't go into a grass-fed, grass finish program. So then we have lack of supply on the grass finish program, which challenges customers and so forth. So we've always got to have that flexibility in terms of enterprise mix, but it will be a key part of it. And like I said, it'll all the steer progeny that come out of our breeding inventory, they will go through that grass finish program. So they're the 3 main enterprises. Like I say, the trade enterprise is probably the biggest one, the breeding enterprise behind that, and then the grass finishing program. I spend a lot of my time not on a horse anymore, unfortunately. I love every chance that I get. Most of the time I spend in a motor car or in front of a computer in the office. But a big part of my job is risk management. And we got some valuations back the other day, and it's now greater than $100 million worth of assets that I manage. for a family from Sydney and a board of trustees who were just up this week. So that's quite a big responsibility and not something I take lightly, with a lot of risk in the business. So I'm constantly thinking about how we can manage that risk in the business. Part of that is an enterprise diversity that I just spoke about. The second thing is low overheads. So the RCS school of thought talks about the 3 secrets of profit being decreased overheads, increased gross margin, increased turnover. So those 3 things rattle around in my head every day, and that is imprinted in the brains of our managers. So they're constantly thinking about that. So all our places run pretty lean. As Glenn alluded to the planting machine that we have, we don't own it. Everything is contracted. You know, you turn up at our farms, you'll see a tractor, a Toyota and a buggy, and that's about it for plant and equipment. There's no tax monuments that Dave Pratt talks about from Ranch Management Consultants in the States. Low overheads, very low inputs. We use virtually no synthetic inputs now. Any inputs we do use are of a biological nature or seed. When we're looking at lifting the weakest link on each farm, we're using a multi-species pastures there now, and that's about the only input cost that we have. So it's a low overhead business, which means our guys don't have to make too much before they start making a profit. Effectively is how I look at that. The bigger that cost base is, the more you've got to make before you start making a margin. The third part of our risk management is that geographical spread. So Wilmot's at Ebor, 1,200 mil rainfall, very volcanic basalt soil, incredibly fertile. Woodburn's at Walker, more of a granite soil base, more conducive to breeding cattle, and I used to talk about it being predominantly a native pasture base, but it's rapidly improving into improved pasture as we've done some development there. Morocco's down to Gunnedah, more of a winter production property, and so that was, again, a part of that risk management where at this time of year we're buying probably 2,000 cattle into Wilmot at this time of year each year, and we're not selling many cattle. And then in the autumn, we're selling a lot of cattle out of Wilmot, and we're not buying many cattle. And so that was a lot of market exposure there in terms of everyone else is trying to buy cattle in the spring, so whatever the price is, we've got to go with it. Everyone else is trying to sell cattle in the autumn, whatever the price is, we've got to go with it. So we bought country in an inverse climate, such that when we're selling cattle out of Wilmot now, Brent is starting to sell... when we're buying cattle into Wilmot, Brent is starting to sell cattle out of Morocco in the same market. So we're operating in the same market, just as a share trader would, I suppose, is probably the best analogy there. And the same in the autumn when we're selling a lot of cattle out of Wilmot, Brent's starting to buy cattle into Morocco. So we're able to operate in the same market month in, month out. For anyone who's done KLR, that's sort of the principle that we're working on there. So we're capturing a margin, whatever the market is, whether it's going up or going down, on one side or the other, we're starting to capture a margin. And then Paradise Creek is in Inverell. So not as cold as Wilmot and Woodburn, not as hot as Morocco. That's the only box it didn't tick. We would have liked it to have been 100 k's further west, but it ticked every other box for us last year when we were looking for the next asset. So that's kind of a bit of an overview of the whole business. I don't know who wrote that bio, but as it says, I'm the big picture thinker, right? I'm low on the detail, but big on the big picture thinking. So that gives you kind of a broad overview of the business and my role specifically within that. To talk about how we do what we do, Glenn alluded to the principles, and so there's a few things there. One is our grazing management, and that is underpinned by the 6 RCS grazing principles. And we can implement them. A lot of people ask me where to start, and you can implement those grazing management principles without spending a cent. Okay, we've all got some fences, we've all got some sort of a water system. All that takes is starting to combine mobs and start moving them around the landscape, providing more rest on country where you might not have before. That doesn't cost anything. So those 6 principles being plan, monitor, manage, rest, the right rest at the right time of year and the right amount of rest, matching stocking rate to carrying capacity. So our guys are fluctuating their stocking rate monthly based on how much feed available they have, and that's probably their greatest skill is their ability to feed budget, and Glenn alluded to that when the drought broke. We did the same thing. We were basically destocked. We had 180 head left on 14,000 acres, and I started buying cattle on the 25th of January, and I bought about 3,500 head in 6 weeks. We did that. I just didn't stop, basically, and wasn't home much. And about I don't know, 6 or 12 months later, I started to question what gave me the fortitude or the confidence to do that. And it was the fact that all our guys could feed budget. They all knew whenever I rang them, each week as I rang them, and they could see grass growing in front of them, they knew that whatever cattle we bought, we had at least 3 months or 4 months or 5 months or 6 months feed for those cattle. So we knew we could buy them and get back out of them with the feed we had available and do a trade on them. And that which was going to generate cash flow, as we came out of the drought. Stocking rate to carrying capacity. The fourth one is managing livestock effectively, which is all about psychology that I touched on in that video, and is absolutely critical to what we do, because the fifth principle is maximising animal density, and you can't get to density without ticking those first 4 boxes. If those animals aren't in the right frame of mind, if we've got too many or not enough animals, we can't increase animal density. But we now have enough data to demonstrate that animal density has created the biggest change in our ecosystems over the last few years on our farms. So there's 2 words that you leave here with today and printed in your mind. One is density, and the other one is diversity, which is the sixth principle, which is increasing biodiversity, maximising biodiversity. So, which is what we're always looking for. Glenn alluded to it as well. We're looking for as many different species of plants, animals, microbes, trees, etc., through the landscape as we can have. So whenever we're looking at pasture improving a paddock, we put a 12 or 14 or 15 species mix in there, because I just want to, and we add it straight to an existing pasture. So we'll just graze out a pasture with a mob of cows, have them chew it down pretty short, plant straight into it with the intention to keep increasing as much species diversity in there as we can get. The second thing, as to how we do things is those grazing management principles have led us to an improvement in soil health. We've slowly wound back the input program that was pretty strong when I started, and mostly from a cost perspective, I really put the screws on did we actually need to spend that money, or at some point we've got to get out of the way and accept that our landscape's pretty healthy. And let it become a self-sustaining ecosystem, which is what Charles describes in that, that definition of what Regen Ag is our farms being self-sustaining, basically that environment, that ecosystem, and the cows being the tool, nature's recyclers, basically being the tool to complete that feedback loop. So again, there's those soil health principles. Glenn touched on them earlier, but limiting disturbance. We certainly don't ever plough up a paddock. We might use an aerator or a disc seeder when we're planting these multi-species pastures. Very judicious use of chemicals. I wouldn't say that we don't use any chemicals, because we do use some at times when we decide that we need them, but it's very judicious, so much so that the agronomists cringe when they ring me and ask if they can spray a paddock for something. Ground cover is obviously another big one. Living roots in the soil all year round, so that's something we're always looking for, is how can we maximise living plant production and always having living root in the ground, and using livestock as our tool to restore the ecological function. The big thing there being diversity. The third thing that we do is property development, and as I go through these 3 things, so the first one is grazing management. Like I said, you can do that for nothing. You guys could go home today, start to change your grazing practices, and it won't cost you anything. The second thing is improving soil health, which you can spend some money on, you can spend a lot of money on. I would encourage you to consider all the ways that Glenn just described there as to how you can improve soil health without spending much money. But the third thing is property development, and this one scares a lot of people, I suppose. It's a challenging thing for a lot of people, that they can't be regenerative because it costs so much money to transition from what they are to what they need to be regenerative. If you focus on those first 2, if you start that grazing management, and really the best story I can tell here is about woodburn. We've had that place since 2011. Made a lot of mistakes there. We tried for years to try these little things, little changes. When I took over as a general manager in 2019, I started to spend some time there and trying to understand what it was that was holding that place back. And fundamentally, we still had these big paddocks. We had a big mob of cows that was being rotated around there, but they were big paddocks and still pretty low animal density. So I recounted a story that I'd heard from Jim Gerrich, who's a grazing consultant from the States that we had at our field day a couple of years ago. And he talked about two 30,000 acre ranches in the States that he'd been asked to advise. And he went to both of them with $1 million wire and water program. And say these, I can't remember the specific numbers, but say these ranches ran 1,000 cows each. He said, if you implement this program, I'm quite confident you'll run another 500 cows. And the first place said, no way, I'm not spending $1 million, you're crazy, that's too much money, you're out of your mind. The second place said, well, I can't go and buy a ranch next door to run 500 cows for $1 million, so let's get into it. And that's basically, I told that story to our executive guys in Sydney, and they straight away they got that, and I said, I think that's what we need to do here at Woodburn. We've got to increase this animal density. We need to spend a fair bit of money on wire and water. So we just finished that program. Only in the last couple of months, we finished the fencing program there, and Grant was just recounting there's 55 kilometres of single hot wire, there's 76 troughs there, there's 28 kilometres of poly pipe. The whole program cost us $415,000. We're pretty confident that we've increased the carrying capacity of that farm by 20 to 25%, which looks like about 200 cows and probably 200 trade cattle. For us to go and buy another ranch somewhere around Walker to run 250 cows and a couple of hundred trade cattle is probably going to cost us $4 million. So it pays, and I would challenge anyone to not be able to put a business case together around that and present it to your bank manager and have them refuse to finance that. That return on investment there, I mean, we've all seen the inflation in land values in the last couple of years. It's somewhat been, that. The other thing I say about property development, as soon as I put the trough in, as soon as I put the fence in, as soon as I put the bore in and the tank to and set up the water system, that's immediately reflected in the value of the asset, right? The valuer comes along and says, well, this is a drought-proof farm now, so it's worth X amount more than what it was before. And I also only spend that money once. So we haven't spent $400,000 on inputs in the last 3 years over the whole business, because which a lot of places will do. A lot of places I know around home, they're spending $100,000, $150,000 a year on inputs every year. Super, urea, replanting pastures, ryegrass, turnips, etc., etc. It goes on and on. We've eliminated all that cost out of our business. So when I, pitch these ideas to our finance team in Sydney, they say, yeah, absolutely. But, we've got plenty of money to spare because we've eliminated all those annual input costs. We can afford these capex projects. So that farm now is quite extraordinary. We're all kind of blown away by the change that's happened there over the last 3 years. I'm slowly building Grant up to geeing him up to present that story at our field day in February. But that's the third thing. It costs a lot of money, but like I say, the return on that investment would be tenfold. And like I say, you can build that business case quite easily and present it to a bank. And like I say, I would challenge any bank manager to refuse to finance that. In fact, now you can get green finance because they're all trying to encourage green loans for a project like that. That's got an environmental outcome. So that's kind of how we do what we do. How am I going for time? Who's on the clock? You're watching the time, righto. So the second part of what Byron asked me to talk about is carbon. Has anyone heard much about carbon? We've done a little bit with carbon. So there's a few things I'm going to try and cover. The first thing I'll talk about is what we've learned about carbon in our business. A lot of what we've learned is through measurement. Don't want me to move this thing in the middle, Jamie? So we have been measuring our soil health there for, I'll let you do that before I knock it all ass overhead. We started taking soil tests across Wilmot and Woodburn in 2010 or 11 were the first ones we took. And these were just random sites across the farm that Bart selected. They're the same transect. He runs along there with a shovel down to 15 centimetres, takes half a dozen samples, mixes them up in a bucket, sends a sample away from each site to EAL. It's analysed. It's a full soil health analysis for P and N and K, all our macro and micro minerals. But from the outset, we've included total organic carbon, which comes back as a percent. So we've seen fluctuations, we've seen improvements, we've seen decreases across all the farms over that time. But the fundamental thing is that we have been measuring it, so we know where we're at. Good, bad, or otherwise, we actually know what it is. Trish and I live by the mantra that you can't manage what you don't measure. So that's one thing. Before I go any further, is there any soil scientists in the room? I thought you were putting your hand up then, Tim. We should all be soil scientists, that's right, that's good. If there is, and you're too scared to put your hand up, I apologise in advance if I offend anyone. Please don't take this personally, some of the things I'm going to say. Yeah, exactly. That was a disclaimer, right, that all the finance blokes put up on their thing. This is advice, not don't take it for gospel. So one of the people I've learnt the most about around carbon is Dr. Christine Jones. She's doing a field day next Thursday in Tenterfield, and if you can get there, I would absolutely encourage you to do it because she's doing fewer and fewer field days these days, and she is an absolute wealth of knowledge. And I've learnt more from her about soil carbon and soil health than probably anyone else. So there's two pathways of building carbon, and I'm probably going to do a pretty ordinary job of drawing here, but I'll try. So this is ground level, and there's a plant, and it's got some roots that go down in the soil like that. Savvy? So the most common thought process around carbon, particularly from the scientific community, is this process of what they call death, decay and decomposition. So these plants die, they lay down some organic matter on the surface, that slowly decays into the soil surface, and so we can build some soil carbon here on the surface, but it takes forever and you can't build soil carbon unless it rains. That's what they tell you, right? Has anyone else heard that? Yeah. It's all correlated rainfall. Death, decay, decomposition. But it does slowly build soil carbon. And let's say this is 15 centimetres, for example. Here's my scale on the side here, right? 15 centimetres. I used to go to field days when I first got to Wilmot. I used to go to these field days. I won't say who ran them, but they weren't particularly regenerative field days. And on every seat there used to be these rulers that one of our esteemed RDCs used to put out. They still do? I haven't found the box. One day I'm going to find the box in Sydney, I'm going to throw it in a big bin, right? They're 15 centimetres long, these rulers, and it says if you let your grass get longer than 14 centimetres, you're losing palatability, nutritional value, performance, etc., etc., etc. And that was like 2016 and 17. Then we went into this drought. Does anyone remember that? But no one let their grass get any longer than 15 centimetres, had they? Because this RDC said that on that rule that if you let it get any longer than 15 centimetres, you're wasting grass. And then they also try and argue with me that you can't build soil carbon any deeper than, in the top 15 centimetres because it fluctuates too much. Right. That's one way of building soil carbon. The other way, that is far more effective, far more rapid, build soil carbon at depth. It's everything that Christine Jones talks about, and she calls it the liquid carbon pathway. So this is not at Wilmot. This is like Wilmot, right? And the scale here is about a metre. So the whiteboard's not quite big enough. But it means that we have roots going way down here. And pretty well all the soil science to date in Australia and pretty well around the world has very rarely measured soil carbon below 15 centimetres. If they have, they might have gone to 30 centimetres. But there's very little information down to a metre. And most of it, the data and information that's coming out now is coming from the private sector, from organisations like Carbon Link, from businesses like ours who have been measuring stuff down to a metre now. And the principle is that what's above ground is what's below ground. So when the grass is only 15 centimetres tall, it's only got roots down 15 centimetres, so of course we can't build carbon at depth because there's no roots down here. And what happens in the liquid carbon pathway is the plant absorbs CO2, and I'm not a soil scientist, I'm not a scientist, so and I'm the big picture thinker, I'm not the detail person, right? So don't ask me for too much more detail. Glenn probably knows more than this about me, and so does Tim. But so they absorb CO2 and then into their roots, and they exude, expel oxygen back into the ozone layer, and they expel carbon as sugars through their roots, called root exudates, and that's how we build carbon at depth through what's called the liquid carbon pathway. Every time an animal bites the top off that plant, not down to 15 centimetres, sorry, like up here, that's about 60 centimetres. Every time an animal bites that plant off, it restarts that process of photosynthesis. So absorbing CO2, punching sugars down through its roots, exuding them as carbon into the soil. And so it's this process of photosynthesis that drives the liquid carbon pathway, and that's how we build carbon at depth. So every time we graze a paddock, and we try and graze, we talk about the three phases of growth, being phase one, which is somewhere around these 15 centimetres, depending on the plant. If it's clover, it's about 2 centimetres. If it's blah, 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 you understand? So we graze it down to the sort of the growing point of the plant, which is what we call phase one. This is a really vegetative phase through phase two, And then we get to phase 3, which is where plants start to lignify, they dry off, they start to decompose, etc. So we're trying to let plants grow back to the top of phase 2, then graze them back to the bottom of phase 2, the top of phase 1, and then regrow again, and then we try and graze them again. Occasionally, like Demeter fescue, which I really don't like, that lignifies pretty quickly, and that's where we use cows to try and get that back into a vegetative state, back into phase 2. Every time we do that, we're re-priming this carbon pump that is pushing carbon back down to our soil as that plant goes through that process of photosynthesis back into the soil as carbon. Does everyone understand that? How'd I go? That's the first time I've actually presented the liquid carbon pathway. But Christine Jones will do a shitload better job than that next Thursday in Tenterfield. Anyway, the science community haven't ever studied this other than some people like Christine and others who are much bigger thinkers and outside the square. They don't understand this concept of that liquid carbon pathway, and that's how we built carbon at depth, and that's how we'll continue to build carbon at depth over time. And it's interesting. This will be the quickest way to do this. So, no, I can't draw on the back of it. Can I rub that off? Don't take a photo of it, right? It's not really worth taking a photo. You get the picture. I probably could have drawn it on there, but so we have consider this a soil profile. This is 0 centimetres, so ground level, and this is 100 centimetres down at depth. And across here, I won't even put some numbers on it, but that is soil carbon percentage across the bottom. We baselined all our farms in 2020, 21. We just done Paradise Creek the other day, and Carbon Link sent us back an image, a chart, I suppose, that shows the soil carbon percentage through the profile. And it typically goes like that. There's little dots all the way down there where we've got a high soil carbon percentage in the top 10 or 15 centimetres, and as we get down through the profile, that slowly drops off. For all those reasons I just mentioned around how country has been grazed for the last few decades, around, it's related to root depth. Basically, if this is 15 centimetres, we've got lots of roots here, there's lots of liquid carbon pathway, there's a bit of death, decay, decomposition going on, not as many roots getting way down here. That's what we're working on. That's where there's this big opportunity to build soil carbon at depth, is through more plant production, bigger plants, bigger roots, getting plants down deeper into our profile to build soil carbon and push these dots that way. And that's what we're seeing already. In fact, at Wilmot Carbon Link, we're doing some R&D. They came back and took some more samples 12 months after the first ones in 1 year, and all these dots have moved just in 1 year across that way, which is pretty bloody exciting to know that we're shifting it that quickly, and including way down here, and it's down to 120 centimetres. So that's the percentage thing, the 2 carbon pathways.
What percentage is that movement?
Good question. I can't tell you the exact number, but it'd be somewhere between, let's say, 0.3 and 0.5% across there. How am I going for time? How long have we got? Wrap it up? Okay. No dramas. So, soil carbon, righto. Carbon drives the whole system, okay? That's about the extent of my scientific knowledge is if we build soil carbon, we will rebuild ecological health of landscapes. You've heard a bit about climate change, methane, all those sort of things, right? This is how we can overcome that. This is the opportunity for agriculture in Australia to demonstrate as a red meat industry we can be a big part of the solution to reversing climate change and reversing global warming by drawing down so much of that carbon in our soil. Because I don't have time, there's a whole shitload of numbers behind all this that demonstrate that in real terms. So I will give you a very brief rundown. So we measure carbon in percentage, and whenever you get a soil test back, you get it in percentage. So let's use a number like 3% in the top 15 centimetres. So in 100 cubic metres, let's say, in a cubic metre of soil, 3% of that, or 30 cubic centimetres, of a cubic metre of soil is carbon. 30 cubic centimetres, wouldn't it be, in a cubic metre? 3% of it is soil carbon, right? So that's 30 cubic centimetres of carbon. You can convert it to tonnes, etc. If we talk about 3% in a metre of soil, I've just confused everyone. Sorry, confused myself. There's 30. If it's 3% in a metre of soil, that's 30 cubic centimetres. If it's in 3 cubic centimetres, is it? Righto. That means it's only 0.3 or 15% of that number in the top 15 centimetres. So it's much less again. So the scientists say that you can't build it by enough because, going from, say, 0.3 to 0.4 is only a very small movement. Going from, in a metre of soil, from 3 to 3.5 or 4 is a big shift. And when you start converting that to, if this soil has a bulk density of 1, so this is the other part of the equation when you're trying to convert percentage to tonnes of carbon, you need to understand the bulk density. So a lighter soil will have a bulk density of, say, 0.8. A heavier soil has got a bulk density of 1.3 or 4. So you've got to times that number by whatever the bulk density is, right? So we'll just say it's 1, so the number stays the same. Then you multiply that number by 3.67 to get to tonnes of CO2 equivalent, which is the equivalent of 1 Australian carbon credit unit or an ACCU, and that's what you're paid on. We just did some, so I was just describing that before for Wilmot around how we've shifted all these dots across there by that much. Over the whole farm, that equated to about 20,000 tonnes of carbon in 1 year that we've put into our soil. Times that by 3.67 was 75,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. Times that by $30 a tonne, it's a bloody big number. If you can improve soil carbon, you'll increase living plant production, you'll increase soil health, you'll improve the performance of your animals, you improve the health of your animals, you improve the health of your ecosystem, you'll improve the financial resilience of your business, your people will be much happier. All this talk about carbon markets and carbon farming and all that other stuff, all they are is an opportunity to value add, as Byron put it in what he asked me to talk about, is to monetise some of this gain and add additional revenue to your bottom line. Don't focus on building soil carbon to make money. Focus on building soil carbon for all those other reasons I said first. Improving ecological health, improving animal health, improving diversity, animal health, etc., etc., etc. Focus on it for that reason, which is what we've done in our business for the last 6 years. The cherry on the top, or the ice cream, has been the fact that we've been able to monetise some of that, some of this gain in soil carbon, which has added an additional revenue stream to our bottom line. And that's the way we view it. Like I said, our guys get out of bed every day to think about how they can grow more grass, produce more kilos of beef and make more money as a beef production business. And that's all that's on their P&L, is all those costs and income related to beef production. All this income from carbon is on a completely separate budget. Obviously we accrue it back through the business, but it's a totally different revenue stream that we don't even budget on. It's a bonus at the end of the week, end of a decade basically. Does that all make sense? Save it. Write it in your phone. Don't write it in your notebook. Write it in your phone. Thanks, mate.
Round of applause for Stu, please.